I'm very excited to be presenting this. I just had a conversation with some of my students, and it was like, this kind of practice really hasn't been talked about before. And Gabriel was also mentioning this before we opened up the room, that like this is an important conversation that really hasn't been documented, hasn't been had before. And I'm really proud and honored, to be working with you, Christina and Gabriel, and to really develop this and see where it takes us after this conversation. So thank you, and thank you everybody else. So when I was thinking about how I was going to start this conversation, because usually I'm in the dance room, I'm moving around and speaking about these things through movement, not always, with language, with a vocal language, right? It's always usually through movement. And I thought about, wow, there's a lot that I really have to cover, and it's really through an anthropological lens, when we're thinking about that there's so much history and so many elements that are included into Chicano Folklórico. But yet I don't have, academic training in anthropology, but yet as a student of my mother's, this oral tradition, I have trained in that, and that's what has been on, either through my family or through other dancers or parents of dancers or company members or colleagues. Like, this information has been passed to me through that oral tradition, right? And if we think about oral tradition is truly significant in the Americas, right? This is how we've been transferring knowledge from one generation to another, right? This is how we're learning about our history, learning about things. And when we think about oral traditions, right, and this transfer of knowledge, we're thinking of art, we're thinking of culture, we're thinking of language, we're thinking of history, meaning making, right? And this is like forms of an oral tradition can be oral, can just be dance, can be song, can be theater, ballads, chants, all these kinds of ways. Now I see oral tradition as video, right? The way we're recording things, like we used an element of video recording of TikTok, right? This is another way that we are passing down this information that's not like bones or, a written document, a codex, right? Yeah, right. This is a different way that we're transmitting knowledge.
Right, sorry, Rayven, I completely agree with you. I think that taking an anthropological perspective to investigate how we practice these traditions is really important. And I'm so glad that you bring up this idea of that, we have these ancient forms of speaking, because, within the cultures of Mesoamerica, there was no really written language per se, other than, let's say, pictorial language. But in order for somebody to understand what that vision was, what that visual art was, they'd have to learn the story and then tell it to, I think this really hits on this, Mexica phrase that says, it's called Nahuatlatole, which is Huehuetlatole, which translates to the speaking of the wise. In the end, there was what we would call dichos, or things that we would hear our parents say that have been colloquially passed down, and that's as a result of our tradition to be orally communicating.
Right, exactly. And then we see that, you know, if we're thinking about the types of beginnings that, let's say, of movement, you know, we're thinking of this danza, right? And danza already is this form that is after the conquest in a lot of ways, right? It's already has been changed by the Spanish in a lot of ways, whether, you know, when you conquest something, you erase everything, right? And, you know, the documents are erased, the language starts to begin to be erased, the beliefs start to begin to be erased. But yet, through these dances, right, through these movements, somehow that that history still lives on, but yet it evolved into something different, right? And it began to evolve into maybe more, maybe the priests or the friars would allow them to dance to, you know, different religious saints or ceremonies for the practicing religious ceremonies, right? So we see that the danza is still vibrant, the history is still vibrant, but yes, yet it's kind of changing, right? And then once we come to baile, right, baile folklórico, we see then again, right, it's definitely, it's changing. We see this Spanish influence in a lot of ways. We see other Europeans that have come and conquested, right? Some of the areas we see like German influences in the ribbons. We see French influences in the bloomers. We see Asian influences in the China Poblana, right? So we're starting to see what the anthropologist, was it Fernando Ortiz, right? He talks about transculturation, right? So where we're like taking all these cultures and kind of synthesizing them one on top of the other. Nothing, it's almost like nothing leaves. It's like this mountain, right, of information that just comes, right? And then, you know, I don't know if you want to add anything there, Gabriel, but I was going to move into, you know, then we get into ballet folklórico, right? This new world, let's say new world order kind of movement that became to be more westernized. Like,
right,
in that era, in 1910, we see Anna Pavlova, right? We see her dancing ballet all around the world, right? And like,
yeah,
impacted by her movement, that, you know, ballet becomes to be this way of like being Western, right? This new world order of like saying, you know, I belong in this new world order. I belong in this international scene. And Mexico really, really developed their art, their dance, especially, they really like shaped it so that it has these elements of what is Mexican, and yet how do I belong to this Western culture, right? How do I belong?
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that by, you know, you bringing down, giving us a chronological history of how movement develops into these different disciplines and different stages, you know, in regards to when you're talking about, you know, when the Spanish came and decided to eradicate whatever ceremonial practices were, let's say for the Aztecs or other cultures in the Aztec, during Aztec times. You think about very easily how the X, which was a point of departure for the Mexicas, as they thought that the X was their form of cross, signifying the cardinal points or the transcardinal points, and then it has to become, you know, the Catholic cross. You know, you can do your dance as long as there's a Catholic cross or Catholic symbol there, you know. And then changing it up to sort of bring, it becomes baile, you know, because it becomes los bailes del pueblo, you know, of the people of that. But then you have this injection of foreign influences, you know, as you said, with the Germans, the French, the Russians coming in and sort of appropriating our dances, but then creating something else that we in our of ourselves also appropriate. So we start making it much more than just bailes or bailes del pueblo. It becomes a spectacle. It becomes ballet folklórico, and then it starts to touch on different little things that change according to each region. So yeah, the point of transculturation starts to grow and further layered and further layer, and then it becomes part of our culture here in California, because then we start seeing how different teachers from the early 40s, you know, Lilia Aguilar and Josefina Jimenez, and then following with the rest of the great maestros and maestras, you start to see how now they start to adapt it to our property, which I'm saying California, you know?
Right. And a lot of times I feel like it's not top down, but it's bottom up. You know, this tradition is bottom up, and a lot of times when it's like that, it's almost like protests. You know, it's almost like against, even in the danza, from what I've learned of Basque culture, that the danza was about like fighting the you know, not fighting, but like protesting the top, and that's kind of how it still develops. And we see it now, you know, as a performer and choreographer, I get a lot of flack, and I hear it all the time, you know, discussed about Mexican Americans really bastardizing, is that the word, the movement and the tradition and the clothing and the music, you know, but people are not recognizing the then history of the Chicanos, right? You know, they are grandizing this Mexican Revolution, right? But yet in 1848, we have this like Mexican American War. And those of us that were on this, you know, on the side that the United States took, we see, you know, different things happening, right? Different impacts, different fights, right? There's like, you know, we're thinking about in that time, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? This was like something that was so significant for Mexican Americans that's not talked about, that's nobody knows about. And then when it is talked about, it's more talked about the land that's, you know, given, the significance to United States, but what about the people? You know, it's not often talked about. When I was doing research, I was like, wow, nothing talks about the people that, you know, what happened to them, right? What happened to us? You know, I'm part of that group, right? My family's part of that group.
Right. You know, Rayven, I think this brings me up to something that's really important to state, because, you know, I think what we're talking about is we're talking about a crossroads that we face. You know, a lot of us that are Mexican, a lot of us that are Mexican American, and sort of this bridge, and how do you represent one and the other at the same time? So we being in the middle of that as Chicanos or Chicanx people, it's important to understand, you know, I always look at it in my perspective. For myself, I see it as like, you know, I really want to represent my ancestors the proper way. So whatever it is that I can do to honor them in that sense, you know, carry the rebozo correctly, put the sarape on correctly. Yes, I'll do that. But I also think that there are stories that can be told from the perspective of those who have remained in California since the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. You know, one thing, I'll just give you a really good story that really always takes me to, you know, a different place. And it's the story of Marrano Beach, which is right here in the San Gabriel Valley. This is the area where people were not necessarily encouraged to go to Santa Monica Beach or Venice Beach. So they had to go to the nearest place. And it was, you know, Marrano Beach is the section here in San Gabriel where people of color were kind of told like, yeah, that's where you go. And I can always imagine, you know, that this happening 60, 50, 75 years ago. What a great story to tell. But you can't say that with, you know, regional dances of Mexico. And I think that that's a really great and important story to tell. But how do you do that if you're not putting it in a fully ballet folklorico context? There has to be an outlet for it. And I think that that's why Chicano or Chicanx stories are also part of the conversation that should be developed or can continue to be further developed, just like, you know, you've done with some of the dances that you and your family have produced.
Right, right. And moving towards that, you know, that's where my family begins, right? It's like, you know, my mom taught me these dances, and, you know, she's part of this era of the Zoot Suiters. She's part of this era of, you know, these forgotten people that were supposed to have these rights, right? But then yet became urbanized, moved more and more to the city. Space is changing, right? Rights are changing for themselves, and then we start to see, you know, different movement. Like I said, the Zoot Suit. We start to see movement like when we hear Miranda get that, right? Or Maria, she talks about dancing to Whittier Boulevard, right? And when she describes this as choreographing identity, right? This movement of like lowriders going through the streets and these women dancing that don't really know their folklorico background, but they have this psychic memory, right? They have this embodied behavior that reminds me when I'm reading this article of the Aztecs, right? This like, you know, this pyramid, the hierarchy, the dancing going on. That's really being pulled into the scenario of the, you know, of 60s, right? Of when we see dancing Whittier Boulevard, right? And that's where our movement, you know, comes in, and I get into my mother, right? And that's where she started creating this movement that included all these memories, right? All this memory and this environment, right? And so I have a video. It's my mom and I, we choreographed this when I was 12. And it was because we were inspired by Linda Ronstadt, right? This was this woman that, you know, everybody thought was just quote unquote American, right? And then she comes out singing her roots, right? And it was so powerful. It was such a powerful moment. It was like, wow, all the women around me, the family members, my mom, like, wow, I can honor them with this dance. And we created this dance in '91, if you want to just show just a little bit. And this dance was not only created by my mom and I, but also what changed is that all of the dancers here had a say, had a part to play in choreographing this dance. And that is where, again, Chicano Folklórico really derives from. It's the way we interpret it. It's the way we are able to express ourselves in this video.
And this is from Canciones de Mi Padre, Linda Ronstadt, 1989, right? 1990, where this album came out, correct?
Right. You know, we're not exactly synchronized. You know, we all have our own voice in a way. We're all interpreting the movement differently. And then, you know, my mom just passed away last year, and we're still dancing this. We're still teaching an iteration of this again and again to the next generation, right? I don't know if you want to show that, but let's move on because it's already 4:25. So, you know, we kind of see where, hopefully you see where this is going, where it derives from, you know, that it's about the experiences, the elements, the resources that we have available to us. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say maybe because of that, like you could tell them why you originally chose La Danza de los Viejitos for this time.
Right. And so this time came where it was like, whoa, we all have to be covered up. our most vulnerable generation, or our, you know, the older generation became the most vulnerable, right? And they're the ones that that are giving us these oral history, right? This oral tradition, that's what's being passed on. You know, I keep hearing kids saying about the protests, like, oh, this is different. You know, we're really going out there and making a difference, but yet they're not getting the stories from their parents, you know, from their grandparents. They're not listening to what their parents have already done. And are they gonna make a difference if they're not listening to those stories, right? And that generation is the most important, is what we need to keep sacred, what we need to value, where we need to learn from, you know, that either they tell us, don't do that because I did it before, mija, you know, don't make that mistake again, or, you know, I see where you're going wrong, turn right, right? And we're not listening to those. And that's why I thought, wow, Danza de los Viejitos has so much relevance right now, right?
You know, oh my God, you just made me, you just reminded me of something. I remember that I used to look at my grandmother's hands, and I used to look at her hands and they were wrinkled. And I would say, hey, grandmother, why do you have wrinkles? And she said, they're not wrinkles, they're warrior scars. And you just pressed on that, how so true, you know, especially because when you think about, when we talk about Danza de los Viejitos, you have to put on a mask, right, to represent them. And now, in how ironic that now we are all having to wear masks, but where that story goes, it really will be up to us. And I think that that's why your intent is with saying there is a story to Chicanos and people of Chicanx descendancy, because they can tell those stories based on what they've learned from their elders. You know, I mean, that's the whole reason why dichos is so important. This is why you hear their counsel, because they have been there, they've done battle, and now they're passing it on to you. And so that's great. Thank you. Sorry, that was a moment.
Well, that was perfect, right? And I, you know, working at SPARC, you know, we have this amazing leader, Judy Baca, right? This amazing leader that has been through so much experience and has created this incredible organization, right? And I often hear her talk about things like, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, this works. Like, I'm telling you, this works. Or she'll say, maybe we got to do this differently, right? Because this I can foresee the future, right? This is the wrong direction to go in, right? And that is so powerful in the work that we do, in the lives that we live, right? And I guess, like, when I was thinking, when I hear that, I was thinking of how do I include that? And in week 3, I think, or week 4, I started to think about intergenerational, right? Like, what can I do to listen to my parents or my grandparents, a story, or maybe a way that they've done carpentry, or, you know, they've created murals, or they've sewn something. And I thought, like, wow, what if we put that, and then what if we ask them that and learn about it? And then we, if they're kids listening, we as kids teach our parents something. A lot of times technology, you know, is something like, whoa, like, parents have like such a hard time, but yet the kids come in and they're like, here, you know, I remember my mom would just have so much trouble and I'd be so angry with her. But, you know, the kids at the studio would then go and sit with her and teach her how to use her phone, right? So there was like this exchange of wisdom. And I did this intergenerational movement of the Running Man, right? And I think I have it in week 4. I don't know if you want to play that real quick or not.
I think since we're close to, maybe we hold the video just because we're close to question time, and we can maybe dive into like how this idea reflects like costume making too, and like that, how that idea was introduced.
Definitely. Let's do it.
And just how, like, again, everyone's home and like that intergenerational stack and all of that history that's like new and old at the same time, how that kind of inspired you to collaborate and do the same thing in our costume making.
Right, right, definitely. You know, again, working at SPARC is like, it includes this different media of expressing ourselves, and art and costume making, which is, Gabriel, and you know, we talked about this, is like, it's, dance is not just, this folklorico is not just movement, it's everything. It encompasses everything. You know, the music is what moves us. The costumes we wear and the art is the way we express ourselves and what we're feeling and what we want to look like, right? And then we also have the dance. And so when I came to Christina, you know, I had asked her, since we're all in the home, and what I think Chicano Folklórico is, or Folklórico is like using the resources around you. Like, what do we have around us to create these costumes? We only have what's inside our house. And Cici, you took it a step further when, you know, you started thinking about protests and what that means as costume making.
Yeah, and I'd say the idea there is like how intertwined environmental justice is with racial justice, and how like defiant it is to use things around your home. Even like when we made the mask, I think week 4 or 5, it ultimately was a mask of Trump, and it was like, this man refuses to wear masks, so not only will we wear a full mask, it'll be his face and it'll be on something recycled. You know, as we know, like, he does not care about the environment, and it's like, it's climate change disproportionately affects communities of color, and that was like a beautiful thing that just aligned with your dance. And like, I think Gabriel told me in the beginning too, like, this dance, because you both taught me about it, it survived conquest. So it just is like the continual survival, and using that as resistance has been really cool.
Yeah. Not only that, but you know, Cici, in its core, the essence of the dance is, or the essence of folklorico or dances of our people are that, you know, at the very beginning, when we started seeing these oral traditions being performed at the pueblo, on the tarima, it wasn't like people had matching costumes. You know, people showed up with whatever they had at home, with whatever they had as their own personal, you know, and then maybe it was recycled. You know, a lot of dances, if you look up the indumentaria, or, you know, the clothing that they wore for the regalia, a lot of it had to do with whatever was around. You know, the flora and fauna are such a huge point of representation in folklorico dancing. And so for you to say, you know what, let's work with environmentally sustainable products that we can find at home, that we can use to say that this is a form of protest, that completely leads to that point of Danza de los Viejitos as a resistant dance. You know, to say, yes, you conquered us. Yes, you've made us change the choreography, but guess what? We're still going to be doing it. We're still going to be doing it to protest, to remind you that wisdom is a very high virtue to have, and that if you continue to harvest it, it will give some beautiful offspring, which is our generations now, or the generations after us, who will continue to do these Danza de los Viejitos, you know?
Right,
right. So we had a request to show a clip, so maybe we'll show a little bit of it. We'll also put in a link to, if y'all haven't done it already, like our class site and the course classroom, but let me pull one up.
Yeah, there was you know, like in the first section, I did like stage direction. You know, how do we all agree on what stage direction is? Emotions, right? So this is stage direction here. You know, how do we agree on where we're at? The screen, you know, stage left, stage right. And then I pulled it into, you know, these these elements of direction, right? Air, water, earth. And then I move into doing the zapateado, right?
That we do.
It's a complex tutorial, but I think it's very clear. You know, the work was very clear, very concise about how to scaffold each element of the choreography. Here we have the intergenerational movement and the cane movement. This is week 4, right? So we're accumulating work, scaffolding the work.
And then I have, can you guys still see them? Oh, I think I have to switch to the other side. I'll show really briefly just the arts part of it. Let's see. So yeah, this is when this is like the mask lesson, and this is a traditional mask. So for those of y'all who haven't taken it yet, it'll just kind of tell you the materials in the beginning and then work through it. But it all has the twist of like taking it from your personal perspective and things in your home, your own experiences. So it'd be great to see if anyone has done it, just the responses that have come up.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So if they have any, do we have questions that?
I haven't received any questions via the chat yet, but we're more than happy to just open the conversation up. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute your mic.
Martha Ramirez does.
Martha, hello.
Hello, congratulations for all of your work. Well, my God, that's wonderful. Well, I just wanted to put in my 2 cents worth of when you were talking about, you know, the evolution of the danza, and I just like kind of paralleled it with my studies in the Day of the Dead ritual. And I think that one of the important parts of that I think of the component of our ancestors flowing from one generation, being impacted with the Spanish conquest, and then further impacted by globalization and etc. Is that, let's say 3,000 years before the Spanish conquest, we had, even though indigenous cultures were different, there was always like a worldview that was similar. And that is that we are all one organism, the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, us. So we all, we're contained within this life cycle and a form of understanding. So all of our calendars, our rituals, our dances, our art, everything is put together in one holistic point of view, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the most important things one of the most important missions of that society was to pass on exactly from generation to generation through word of mouth, through the codices, through the rituals, what was important for that society to preserve that idea of a holistic point of view, of how we're going to have better crops every year, how we're going to have our rivers, you know, what are we going to do when there's droughts? So all of this was contained in this kind of thought. And so that was probably the most important mission that was handed on. And even in the last moment when Cuauhtemoc was taken hostage by Cortés, he told everybody that what we had to do is preserve our knowledge and pass it down, even through what was going to happen. Like today, even what was going to happen now, we have that same kind of vision of, everything is changing and nothing is going to be the same. Right. And so there's a very important word that that has been used to make this possible. It was in times of, let's see, 30 years after the conquest, in 1550s, around there, Fray Sahagún, he and 20 artists, Tlacuilos, wrote this magnificent encyclopedia, Nahuatl, and then translated to Spanish, and then with all the drawings. And, and there was all of these tremendous you can't imagine everything that the people were living through. There was all of these epidemics killing millions of people. Of course they were suffering. And yet you would say, why did these indigenous people, these artists, why did they collaborate with the invader? Why did they collaborate with Sahagún? And they would say that our mission is to, if we live just one more day, to pass on what we were told that we had to do, because we might be the only ones that can do it. And so, and so there's this other word that is very interesting in the Nahuatl language to explain this, this kind of shift that we see, which is Ixiptla. Ixiptla means Ixiptla, I-X-I-P-L-T-L-A, Ixiptla. And this means that I borrow, Xipe means like the covering. I borrow the covering of you, the invader, say Virgen de Guadalupe, to cover my Coatlicue, to cover my Tlazolteo. And then it's okay to pray, because I am praying for the essence. I'm making rituals to this essence of Mother Earth. And so on and on, we're gonna see that happening, that in, like say, in the Day of the Dead altars, there's always a Virgen de Guadalupe, there's always, these saints. However, they have this power in them. They have a powerful strength. And so those dances of that time, there was 18 different months of 20 days, and each one had a dance. Each one had a dance for the people that they would dance, giving thanks to the earth, giving thanks to Tlaloc, for the salt makers. So each one had a ritual that was totally within that worldview. That's what's missing. That is what's missing right now. We don't have that understanding. And so we'll say, oh, then, the dance is beautiful, it's nice, and, the Aztec dance, but we don't really understand what's happening. And so it's like I'm saying, like, we're missing the spirituality of the ancients. We are just taking what was in times of Lázaro Cárdenas, 1930s, 1940s. He was a socialist president, almost, in that context. And he sent all of the dancers to the villages, and he says, go and find what you find, because that's what we need to create an idea of nation.
Identity, yeah.
So these brigadas culturales, they went into the little pueblitos there in Chiapas and Michoacán, and they brought what they brought. Now what happened is, unfortunate, but what happened is that from a ritual of a community, it turned into a spectacle. It turned into a performance. That means that there's an audience, it's outside, and something's happening there. It's beautiful, colorful, and all that. But it has been, the spirituality has not been expressed, and yet we feel it. We feel it when we see the Aztec dancers. We feel it when we see the viejitos. Those viejitos dance are for the Day of the Dead, because Michoacán, that's what it is all, because the butterflies come to Michoacán, and that, they were the ancient warriors. And so they're the spirits of the ancestors coming to dance. And that, when we begin to see how everything flows from one thing to the other, it is absolutely empowering, I think, for our generations. It's empowering. And I think that our mission now is to really look at this from that point of view. And just one last thing, when you were talking about protests, talk about protests, los chinelos de Cuernavaca, de Morelos. In times of Carlota and Maximiliano, 1850s, 60s, in Mexico, they would have these great, enormous parties, these Frenchy kind of, you know, Europeanish kind of, with their costumes and their great hats. They're all of this just exuberant kind of European costumes, and the indigenous people would just hide and look at them, and then they were not allowed into these parties, of course. But then outside, what happened is that they started fooling around with their, they would take a little bit of, you know, a little cloth, and they would say, oh, ho, 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 ho. And then they were actually making fun of these people. And then they began to be arrested and taken to jail. And so they decided to wear a mask and cover all of themselves up and put a big old hat on. And they became the chinelos, the ones that move the hips. And so now, in every party, every graduation, every whatever celebration, you'll see the chinelos there in Morelos. You'll see them. And that's where it comes from. So it was a protest against that they didn't allow them to have, you know, access to those parties. And then they began to really protest against the invasion of the European and French.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. I think that, you know, I think that Martha hit on a really interesting point, which is that, you know, the Tlahuilocoes that were working with Sahagún were creating, you know, not only in and of themselves a new kind of intellectual, an indigenous intellectual, because you have these, you know, indigenous Mexica who were learning, they knew their Nahuatl, they were learning Spanish, they were learning Latin, and they were also learning how to do pictorial, you know, Nahuatl or early sacred writing illustrations, right? And to think that that's almost in and of itself, it's an Ixipla, because they're taking on that characterization of the Franciscan orders, you know, and they're sort of becoming this new, like, I'm borrowing your skin to present a new, you know, a new sort of identity. So that's really great. Thank you for bringing that up, you know, and it's especially important because when you think about that, you know, the Florentine Codex having those 12 books and each one being dedicated to a very specific, you know, over 2,000 images in that Florentine Codex, and each one of them had a very specific topic and just dissertation, you know, that really allowed us to understand everything. So I think that what Rayven is saying now with regards to that, how we tie back to that is that now it's our turn. And as she said, as Martha said, you know, bringing in that holistic approach, which is part of what all the 6 mother cultures in early times, that there was a bigger concept. And I think that that's also what Rayven is saying is, you know, Chicano Folklórico has to start representing all of us, and maybe we need to start finding those stories that we can relate to, you know, the Linda Ronstadts, the Chicano moratoriums, the Sal Castros, the Zoot Suit riots. All of those are different stories within the Chicano stories, at least here in California, that can really be told via, you know, dance and music and art and visual and creative spaces.
And I think, sorry, Gabriel, I think we have a comment from Glenna who would like to say something too.
Just need to unmute. Hey, Rayven. You know, I was really glad Martha talked about ritual because so much of dance has its roots in rituals that come from a pre-literate time or from a time of indigenous or tribal cultures. And this was a time when people lived without any generation gap, when the children knew what their role was in society. that they followed what the parents did and the parents followed what the grandparents had done. And when that started breaking up, for a variety of reasons, people began to lose touch with the roots of those rituals. And I just remember when I was teaching in LAUSD, and I spent most of my career at Jefferson High in South LA, and the kids used to have a phrase that they used, which was back in the day.
Yeah.
Back in the day essentially was any time before they could remember.
Right.
And so it could have been 1965. It could have been 1365. It was all the same to them. The past was flat. And all that they really knew was what was in front of them, what was in their neighborhood, and what little their parents, who were working very hard and not home a lot, were able to communicate to them. And it was almost, and this is a problem just in general in this country. People are deracinated. They are uprooted from different places, and they are disconnected from what it was in the past that has led to making them who they are. And that leads to all kinds of distress and problems. And what you're doing with helping kids reconnect to that root that they have within their culture is something that is a blessing. I love to see you do what you're doing. You know that.
Yes, yes. You've been following me for a while, since we met at actually UCLA doing the Chicano theater class with.
Yeah, I took both quarters.
Right.
That was so great.
Right. You know, even that Teatro Campesino, the farm workers, like that movement inspired me as I was learning it in my political science class when I you know, my BA is in political science or BS. And so I took a Chicano politics class, and I was like just blown away by the information, and it impacted my movement and my dance. And I went to a predominantly white community college, and I did this history of Chicanos. It was a 10-minute long dance that like went, you know, this story I just told you all the way to like the 80s of like my feeling of like immigrants crossing over and the danger in it, and it was pretty powerful. For, you know, I was so impacted by this class. I created this dance, and they allowed me to do it. You know, I had to audition it, and it was incredible that these professors, you know, like opened up this space for me to be able to create this work. And I was only 20, right? I was 20 years old creating this work. And that right there, you know, is what really just kept influencing the work that I wanted to do, you know, and also inclusion, right? Is like, I started teaching outside of my community in different schools. And it was like, well, Mexican, I'm not Mexican, or like, you know, I'm Black, or like, why am I gonna do Mexican folklórico, right? And I had to begin to think about like, well, what does your voice have to say within tools that I'm you know, giving to you. And it became to be really incredible, the work that those students started to create out of the history or things that the tools that I gave, you know, taught them. They began to create work, right? And that's where I think this folklórico comes from, is like inclusion. And like, it starts, yes, from like a narrative that is traditional, but then has so many different voices and elements now that we're living in the environment that we're living in, right? And like Alfonso, he said, you know, it becomes malleable to the times and to the communities that continue to influence the dance. And I definitely agree with this, and that is the principle of the work that I think Folklórico is, right?
Sorry, Rayven.
Chicano.
I was just going to say, I think Judy has a comment as well.
Yes, my comment is really thank you. Oh, I'm learning a great deal. I'm feeling like I'm getting very educated. I mean, I've been always a big fan of the Folklórico and the music because it was my grandmother's music. And so I didn't really understand the totality of the meaning of it until I started doing my own research and the creation of historical murals.
Mm.
But the whole time that you were speaking, and Marta, thank you also for your deep insight. That was really wonderful. I keep thinking that there is a new movement. There is a movement now that is the movement of masses of people, not only marching across the globe for justice, that movement is the essence of that. What is the essence of that movement? And how does it become dance? And also the essence of spirits leaving the world. Those are the images that kept coming up in my head, you know, hundreds of thousands of people leaving in this sort of massive epidemic. And so I'm very excited to see the way that this new works will be built on from the previous generations. And I add my own story because as a young artist, I walked into a circle of older artists that really gave me insight about, you know, fighting for the 8-hour workday and, you know, advocating for Social Security and unemployment and, you know, the hunger strikes and the bread lines. And I worked alongside of printmakers who were doing those first wave of social justice works. And they gave me lots of techniques. You know, Judy, when you're out in a protest and you have to put up a banner, you know, let the piece that you make fit in the palm of your hand so you can slap it on a pole and run, right? I mean, those techniques came from a generation before me. And at the time, my mentors were in their 70s and 80s. So I do think the viejitos need to keep teaching. The Hopis told me that the grandmothers needed to teach and that the world had become too male. And I think that is true. I think that what do we build on? What is the movement as the whole world gets to its feet to demand the change that we so sorely need? So thank you for your work. I really appreciate it.
Right. You know, just to end that, Judy, it's like the movement that we did create was thinking about this change, right? Like thinking about, but not only thinking about the change, but thinking about building on top of the successes of our, the older generation. Like, what can I learn from the generation before me? And then as we move into this next shift, right? And we did this movement where we were thinking about, you know, side to side, it's about the present. You know, back is about remembering history. And then we did this idea of moving forward. And then like, there was this back motion of like, I'm almost leaving, you know, this is almost it. You're not gonna have me anymore. And then coming back and still creating a little more work, right, before they leave this world, right? So that was definitely part of it. And, you know, thinking about it in mass movement, Judy, is like, I just did this other class and I had 46 people on the screen from all over. So it was international, right? And it was like, wow, we could do this dance, right, in a Zoom class and created in this type of work where we record it or something, right? So it's just another element of it that definitely is, I think that it's following, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
And anyway, comments or questions that anybody had? Or... Okay. Well, thank you. You know, thank you, Cici, for really being an advocate of this work and this class. And, you know, sometimes like, you have an idea, but you need that other person to really kind of say, like, this is how we package it, right? And, you know, thank you to Judy and SPARC for like providing this platform for us to be able to like really record what this is. It has never been documented before. And this is like one of the first times that we are documenting what this is, right? And Gabriel, you know, I really appreciate your input in all of this. You really helped both of Cici and I develop our tutorials and our elements of this work, you know, bringing in not only your knowledge as a Mexican American, but as a, you know, a Mexican yourself, right? And like, how do we include all these things, right? And, you know, definitely as a scholar of this work. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank y'all for, you know, letting me collaborate.
Right.
Likewise, I think that this is really beautiful that you are putting out this new, esta semilla nueva, you know, it's a brand new seed you're putting out there. And just like Martha said, you know, we need that spirit back. We need more of that female chingona power, you know, and making it such a great platform for others to see, you know. Definitely we need more of this. So mazel tov for all of you.
Yeah, please check out the work. You know, it's really a great package that you can take to your classes or learn, you know, for yourself and just watch. And I really think it's a valuable tool to really take and use it. Right. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah.
And on behalf of SPARC, thank you, Rayven, Christina, Gabriel, for all of your insights today, and to all of our guests for adding so much richness to the conversation as well. I actually just dropped a link into the chat for the 6-week Chicano Folklórico course. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out already or to share it with your families, please definitely do so. It is a course that's accessible to all of you free of charge. We do ask that you consider making a donation to SPARC to sustain this work of bringing this really rich legacy of visual art, of performing arts to our communities in Los Angeles. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate also to reach out to SPARC via info@sparkinla.org. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Hasta luego. Hasta pronto.
Gracias.